Welcome. This is
Hey.
the Drupal usability meeting for July 9th, 2021. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen. And also at the meeting are Aaron McHale, Antonia, Christina Chimias, Gabor Hotzi, Offer Schall, Paolo Enrique Cota Starling, and Thomas Howell. So we have a good group this week. As usual, we have a mix of front-end, back-end developers, designers, site builders, which is very helpful for usability. And we also have a mix of native English speakers and people for whom English is a second or third language, which is a good thing to have when talking about user interface text. So let's start with issue 1380720, rename entity bundle to subtype in the UI text and help. And I'm sharing my screen, but Aaron, you have some familiarity with this issue.
Yeah,
What can you tell us?
so I now I can't remember if I came across this issue or I think someone had referred it for review. And I, as someone who's familiar with bundles and entity API, I was quite curious about this one. So the idea here is that Drupal has, we have the entity API and we have entity types, but we have these things called bundles, and we call them bundles in like under the hood, so to speak. But in a lot of parts of the UI, we don't use the term bundle. We use like content type or media type or something type. Um, but we already use the term entity type to refer to like node media taxonomy. Those are entity types, but we just call them their things in the UI. So the idea with this one was to try and find a more like friendly term other than bundle to display in the user interface and help text. Now, there's not a lot of places that the term bundle actually pops up, but where it does pop up mostly, and I sort of looked through the patch, and this is what threw me at first. A lot of the translations use bundle as the sort of like key. So if you take a string like I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but maybe there's some there. So like in the patch, so if there's a string like it'll have the at bundle and then in the translation string. So the idea is part of the patch is going to swap those out for like subtype. And that'll show up on localized.drupal.org and in other places. And then there's other bits of help text. So it's really, this is kind of really changing help text. So you can see some examples right there that Benji's got. So yeah, so in some schema, you can see example where the key would be changed. So that's a kind of example there of what would show up on localized.drupal.org and not so much in the UI itself, because those like bundle and subtype, as you can see right there, would be swapped out for their actual or sorry, not on that one, but most of them, if you look at the translation ones, they'll get swapped out. But there's some like labels, so little bits of interface text. And yeah, there's a translation markup one, so that's a perfect example of one where um, the sort of bundle and subtype would get swapped. So yeah, it's a bit of a funny one for me because I'm so used to, as a somebody who's familiar with entity API, I'm personally so used to the term bundle, and I'm not sure. Say in one sense, subtype feels a bit more approachable, but on another sense, I feel like we're kind of just swapping one Drupalism for another, and potentially creating more confusion by having bundles as a term in really technical documentation, but then in other places swapping that out for subtypes. So I couldn't really figure out where I stood on this issue. So that's why I also thought it'd be good to talk about it and see where other people stand. So hopefully that made sense as a description of the problem. But hopefully we can maybe I guess the real crux of the problem is, do we want to like swap out the term bundle for another term like subtype and then just effectively create some inconsistencies in the technical side versus the UI and help text?
So I had some questions around this. Um, there's a kind of basic implication with the word subtype that it is a hierarchical child of a type. Is that true in 100% of the cases? Because the word bundles generally, I've never been a big fan of bundles. I think it is confusing, but I am concerned that if subtype is not strictly a child of type, that it implies a lot more than it actually does. It feels like it's the wrong word to replace bundles with. And that would be my primary concern. So do you know anything about that? Can you like,
Yep.
if we're not changing it in the back end, then that feels really, really weird, because it means that we're only exposing an actual strict hierarchical relationship in the front end, but not in the back.
Yeah, so the way the entity API is so structured is you have entity types. So again, those are things like node and media. And then you have bundles, which are the things that distinguish, like separate those from a field perspective. So like a content type, like article, is under the hood is a bundle of an entity type. So a bundle or a subtype will always sit within that hierarchical relationship. You can't really have a bundle without an entity type, which is why subtype weirdly kind of makes sense. But I also still don't know how I feel about it.
I guess, why are we calling it subtype and not entity subtype?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you have entity type, and I think they provide some examples. If you go back to the issue summary there, Benji, you'll see some. If you look, scroll up slightly, there is some sort of like up again a little bit, just a wee bit. There you go. So there's some kind of comparisons of what the different terms relate to there. So yeah, you've got entity type, like bundle would be entity sub, could be entity subtype. I think yeah, so decided on option C. So I guess entity subtype is the string version that they would prefer. And then entity, of course, still being entity.
Well, in option C, that means it is actually called entity subtype. And I'm wondering why we would change the labels to subtype rather than calling them entity subtype.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure if it was so I've not been involved in the actual implementation of the patches, but I can only presume it was just to keep it short. You know, if you're in the string translation keys, you know, like just using subtype maybe kept it a bit shorter, but I don't know if there was any discussion around that.
I'm worried about its subtype as a word is loaded in the same way that plugin is a loaded term, etc. And using it without entity in front of it means it's very generic. But we don't talk about types. We do only talk about entity types. And I find it kind of strange that we will use the word entity type, and then adding 3 letters to that is suddenly too long. Entity subtype is only 3 letters longer than entity type. So like from a string perspective, they're basically the same length.
Yeah, that sounds like a good recommendation. At least we could make for that.
Does anyone else disagree with me or agree with me?
I have sort of other concerns. So for example, we already have content types and media types, and content or node is an entity type. So a content type is also a subtype of the node entity type. A media type is a subtype of the media entity type. Um, then, then we have the one really weird exception that we have vocabularies, which are not taxonomy types, but could be. But I also would like to try to focus in this discussion on the usability aspects of the change, and try to focus on where this is going to be misleading or confusing, and whether the proposed change is an improvement to that or not. And I'm not sure how to evaluate that.
Will this change mean that we would have to refer to bundles as bundles in technical documentation only, and then we would have to rewrite maybe site building docs with entity subtype.
Right. I think that was one of the things that was kind of that's bothered me about this issue, is that we'll still end up having the term bundle in the really technical sense of like um I'm gonna not I can't help not go too technical here, but like in an entity type annotation, there's a key called bundle or bundle type or something. There's a couple of things technically right at the lowest level that will always still be bundle. And that's been okay in a sense, because like that term is still being consistent. Like you go to the technical documentation, you'll see bundle. You don't really see it in the user interface, because in the user interface we tend to substitute anywhere that the word anywhere that bundle could crop up for like content type or media type. Like we tend to use those kind of more friendlier names. So from a purely user interface perspective, I think a big chunk of the patch is actually focusing on the localization aspects of things that appear on like the strings that appear on localized.drupal.org. But that is the thing that worries me, is like we end up having then two terms that mean exactly the same thing in an effort to make it, I don't know, more approachable. I'm not too sure. Again, I'm struggling with how I feel about this one.
Yeah, I would just say that in the PHP code, it is going to continue to be called bundle.
Yep.
And that's both in variable names and in class annotations, in array keys, properties.
So I guess, sorry, go ahead.
I saw that Gabor's on. I was wondering, like, from a kind of core maintainer, like I noted that it looked like WebChick was either the one who opened it or who wrote a bit about this stuff. So I'm just wondering, from a core maintainer, like this is a pretty substantial change from things. Like it to me, it seems like a pretty major shift. Do we like? Is there any visibility that Gabor could give us from like is this something that everyone who's been around for a long time feels? Is this something that's a WebChick specific conversation? We should maybe like. I would like to hear more about the motivation for making this change, because I'm reading what's here, but I'm not getting a lot of this is how to do it, but I'm not getting why.
Okay, we'll wrap up your question and let Gabor respond.
Yep, sorry, I'm done.
Yeah, I think the idea was that bundle is too technical and subtype will be less technical. That was probably the idea. But it definitely should only be done if it makes sense, because it has a lot of ripple effects in terms of documentation and screenshots and the whole transition thing that that was discussed earlier. So it's a pretty substantial change indeed. I haven't looked at what NG said about it though.
Antonia, I see you unmuted yourself.
Well, I'm just wondering, what's wrong with media type and vocabulary and content type? I think we have enough terms to, describe specified entity subtypes.
Like the bundles is a word that's there. So the argument isn't about those other terms. It's about replacing bundles. So there's a the category is bundles, and so you're taking that category and you're swapping out bundles with another term. So what all of those things collectively are known as is known as bundles, or will be known as entity subtype or subtype in terms of string. So like hierarchically speaking, it's kind of a logical relationship. So
I'm trying to think for a place in the Drupal UI where we have the term bundle, where it's a place where it would be likely for a content editor to visit, because I don't think any technical users will have issues with the term bundle.
Yeah, I think this is one of those. I think the main target of this is the translation layer. You know, it's yeah, and you're right. In the UI, thankfully, we tend to refer to those things, the various like different bundles. We tend to refer to them as what they actually mean in the UI. We like the patch doesn't really touch on a lot of UI text. What strikes me is that, and I think there's something funny about this, is that this issue was opened like 10 years ago. Now, when was Drupal 8 released? Was that about that time? Because either that or we were just later into Drupal 7. And it strikes me that 10 years ago, the term bundle probably seemed like a big Drupalism. And this issue probably made a lot of sense 10 years ago. But I wonder if 10 years on, you know, Drupal 7 was a long time ago, Drupal 8, we're now in Drupal 9, we're looking at Drupal 10. The concept of Drupal's entity API has remained fairly stable through the last like few releases, like certainly since Drupal 8 was a big shift. And bundles has been around and it's got to the point 10 years later where any Drupal developer knows what bundles are, at least they probably should if they've done anything with, you know, any sort of entity development. I feel like does there come a point where a Drupalism becomes so well known that it's no longer a Drupalism? Like, have we got to that point where this term, I wonder, is now influencing other architectures of other CMSs? You know, like if you 10 years is a long time, right?
Yeah, so 2011 was the year that Drupal 7 was released. I'm kind of skeptical that the term bundle has gained any traction outside of Drupal. And also, I think this issue is talking about it in the UI text. So I think we're talking more about the effect on site builders and site administrators than developers. Also, I should mention I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So if anyone finds it easier to put a comment in there, I'll make sure that it gets into the discussion.
the last thing I would say is that I do worry about naming something different and not changing it in the back end, because this term really is, it's very specific, and I think splitting language would be problematic. And I like better words than bundle, but I'm worried this is trying to solve the problem in the wrong way.
I think you make a good point on that one, and I'm thinking back to when I was learning the entity API, and then I was like, oh, these things, bundles, these are really cool. I wish more frameworks had these. But like being able to search online for like, you know, how to make Drupal 8 bundle is like, you couldn't see, but I was like hammering my keyboard as I was doing that. Is like if we start splitting out those terms, bundle and subtype, you kind of like split out the quality of the search results, because some people online will start calling them subtypes, some people, like, you know, Stack Overflow and things will start calling them bundles, and then does it just make it harder for like new developers to get into Drupal? Or
Well, as a site builder, it makes building with contrib modules difficult, because then does the contrib module talk about bundles, or does the contrib module talk about making changes to subtypes? And so you can potentially cause a fork in a lot of various areas, because the question becomes, did we not change bundles in the back end because of technical debt? Like, we're worried about impacting everyone and we didn't make that, like, it's hard to communicate to everyone that this is the same exact thing. We just call it two different things, which is generally in taxonomy not a good idea.
Right. Which is ironically would have an impact on the taxonomy module. Yeah. I think one other thing to add is that coincidentally, I was reading a lot about content modeling this week, which is quite similar to data modeling, but from a content perspective. And there's some interesting terms in there, and I unfortunately what I read it too fast and don't remember some of the specific terms, but if we were to make a change like this away from bundles to a different word, subtype is maybe not the right word, but maybe we can look to things like what are the categorizations of content modeling, which is a fairly recognized approach, and how are those grouped together? And maybe there's a word from that makes sense. I nothing particularly struck out at me, but maybe we can use, maybe there's something in that.
So unless someone has something constructive to say at this point, I'd like to wrap up the discussion at this point. And I think that what we really need is a better issue summary to help us evaluate, because there's really not a lot of detail in what the user interface changes are going to be. And that seems to be the main point of the change.
Also, if this is really focusing on translation strings, then that also means that those strings would have to be translated again, because they were using the bundle placeholder before. So
That's right.
that's also a little bit
Right.
of work that we'll have to follow.
So I think unless anyone objects, I'll leave a comment asking for more information in the issue summary. And once we get that, and maybe some of us will have a time to look at the issue more closely in the interim, we can come back to it at a later meeting. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. Yeah, we could certainly bring it back. I think the key thing to capture is from the kind of things as well we've been saying, and I'll be sure to review the recording as well and just make sure that we can capture as many of those little nuances, because I think this is a bit of a I've struggled with this issue for the last 2 weeks, so.
Okay, so for the second half of the meeting, again, here's the list of issues that were suggested. Anyone want to talk about design for the language switcher in Olivero? I know that's something Mike Herschel requested. Or shall we go to the other one that is already marked needs review?
If we were to look at that one, the only other one that jumps out to me is there's the issues just above that one, the front page view, assuming it will be the front page and hence doesn't have a title. That's kind of an interesting one. I can't really speak too much on it, but I just know that was tagged as well as like something. I think it was spawned off another issue that perhaps would benefit from a review. So there's that one too. If we I wonder if the other needs review one might be quite a quick one to discuss. I think it's just.
All right, well,
then again,
the
it
other
might not be.
Needs review issue. This is 1224126. Tasks and index are nouns that are too abstract. And it says the admin page shows two local tasks, tasks and index. In the Drupal tradition, these are very abstract nouns that no one understands. That's sort of an out of context screenshot. Maybe I have a local site running.
Yeah, that was actually my fault because I was like, hey, this needs screenshots, so I just took a screenshot and clipped it and then put it up. So it was my fault for the out of context screenshot.
So it's the main admin page that I think we're.
Yeah, that's right. So just like /admin will get you there.
Tasks and index. So this is exactly what we're talking about. These the labels on these two tabs.
Yep.
When you first hear the word tasks, you probably think of a to-do list, blah, blah. When you first hear the word index, you might think of a key value store, or more likely you'll just be confused. Proposed resolution to better describe what these pages are. And the proposal is administration categories and configure by module.
Ouch.
You think that's too many words?
They could use two more. Yes, yeah, that's too many.
Yeah, I'm not sure like configure by module. Is it by module? I don't think that list is by module, is it? Oh, never mind. Yes, it is. That's a clever little screen. I always forget that exists. Wish I'd known that more often. You know, that time you're struggling to be like, oh, where's this thing? And it's like, I wish there was a list. And it's like, oh, yeah, there is a list. It's right there.
Right. I have to say, I don't use that page very often. I use the menu. I use the toolbar and sometimes with extensions.
So I think that the point makes sense, but like with index, it would make more sense to me if we just said what kind of index it was, like module index. That might bring clarity. Well, but something along those lines. Doesn't have to be index. I don't like a sentence for a tab. So I really don't like the proposed change. But I think a change would make sense because it sounds like none of us use the index tab very much. And it's probably because index is way too little context.
So let's look at them one at a time. Shall we think about index first?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the proposal is configure by module, and I'm not sure that configure is even accurate, but let me just use my browser tools to change it, just so we can for the sake of argument, see what it looks like.
What about index by module? Because I agree with Thomas, like index is, okay, it makes sense as a term. It's basically an index, but it's a bit vague on its own. So like, yeah, what if we did index by module?
I agree that configure by module is weird, in my opinion.
Could it be that inexperienced users might confuse that for the extent page?
Well, first they have to get here to find it. So once you're on the administration page, you have this bit of help text. Well, if we're going to call that something like index by module, should we call the other one index by task? Or group by module, group by task?
I guess I really dislike the word, like I index by module. I don't see how that means anything different than module index.
Yeah. But then if we went with module index, like that feels like exactly what Antonio was just saying. Like, isn't the extend page an index of modules? Just with different function?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Thanks.
Administer by module, group by module.
Module administration or module admin.
I think I prefer using a full word.
I generally do too. It just felt repetitive.
Right. If
I don't
the
know if
whole
it's a
page is administration, then repeating the word administration is probably not needed.
yes, that's is what I want, what I would say.
Like for instance, if you go to edit a node, like a node or a media or something, or a taxonomy, we don't, in the tabs, we have like view, edit. We don't, we keep those short.
I don't have any.
Yeah, should have been still do mammy. I have, while you're doing that, I have to say, how did we ever get by without a profile that just creates content on install? Like, where's that been for the last, like, what, 20 years? You know what I mean? Like, how did we build Drupal without that?
Well, that was the point of the out of the box initiative, right?
Right.
So this may sound really crazy, but I was thinking, like, if this is administration by task and administration by module, would either by tasks by module make sense, or just keeping tasks and calling this module? Like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the different contexts. I get that it is potentially confusing, but I'm trying to play it through.
I was thinking a similar thing, like how would, yeah, the word by, like by module.
I'm starting to wonder whether it will make sense to use the word quick links, module quick links, because that's just all this is, isn't it? It's just shortcuts to pages that you can also get to using the toolbar.
Yeah.
It's funny, I think of it the other way around. The toolbar is the shortcut to get to these pages.
I do use a toolbar as well. I don't know. I would never use this index.
To me, these types of pages tend to be placeholders in the hierarchy. So when you've got the URL and you have a page like admin/index, this is just a page that ends up sitting there for not always a great reason. It's because there's nothing better to put there. Like, I would typically think you'd put a dashboard, but Drupal doesn't have a whole lot of dashboards in its architecture, so it ends up with these placeholder pages with a lot of links on them.
And to be fair, this page doesn't even need to exist structurally. If you look at the URL, it's admin/index, nothing actually sits under it. The only one that structurally really needs to exist is by task, based on what we're seeing right on the screen, the first one, because that's just /admin. And now I'm going to be insert what WebCheck would say here, which is I wish we had telemetry data to tell us how many sites are actually using this page, which is something I
I
hear
would
WebCheck
agree
say
with
a lot.
Aaron. Yeah.
Is it there for usability reasons when people want to get to these links and they can't use the toolbar? Is there any reason for that?
I don't know. It kind of feels like one of those like hangovers from long ago. Like I bet this was added in Drupal like 5 or something, and then or 6, and then nobody like when before we had a toolbar, you know, like when it was a giant menu and someone was like, "Oh, we need an index of all of this," and now we probably have no idea what the rationale for adding this in the first place was.
And remember how much trouble I had navigating to this page. None of these links goes to this page. I suppose I could go to content, which is admin content, and then it's in the breadcrumb.
Right. And that's what I was saying is like when I see these pages, it's because they didn't want to have when you have a breadcrumb and there's going to be things that go beyond this, it's there so that if someone deletes subsequent breadcrumbs, they have a page to land on. So like if they went to admin slash pants and you got rid of pants, because that is a trick that I used to use back in the day as a site builder, you land on something. This is a placeholder page as much as anything. It's not there to go to, it's there if you land there.
So that's
Actually,
similar to using the breadcrumb is by deleting the last part of the path.
Yeah, that's actually what that was what I used to do a lot with Drupal. So that's just a kind of site builder shorthand to find out where things go. And users tend to do that a lot too if they get lost. So in a lot of ways, those pages are supposed to point to where all of their breadcrumbs are. So like if I went back to admin, I can now go from having been in content and go to configuration without necessarily knowing where on a menu to or on the toolbar to look. It allows you to traverse things in order.
you know, it's funny if we got rid of the index page altogether, then both tabs would disappear, and this issue would be like fixed by virtue of getting rid of that page. And
I vote for
it's
that.
yeah. Incidentally, if you're like the 5% of sites who probably discovered this page even exists, and you're like, oh, I could use an index. There's a really good module called Coffee, which basically adds an Apple Finder style search to your site to find configuration pages, and that's probably way easier than whatever it's on the index page.
Well, my if the links on the index page, in my mind, really belong as a column if they don't already exist, because I don't recall on the extend page. Like on the extend page, can you get to these admin links from every module? If you can't, the correct solution to me would be to migrate that index view into links that would show up here so that you could, or put that tab on this page so that you had configuration and you could get to each module's configuration from extend. It feels like it's in the wrong place
So
if we want that functionality.
I can answer that question. So take block layout and any page that has configuration such as block layout. Actually, there is no block layout module. What is that? Admin structure block.
Yeah, that's coming from the
Well,
block
it's the
Configure.
module.
block module.
Yeah.
It says block above that.
You're right. Okay, so the block module. Um, if you expand this, which is on the modules page or the extend page, it's collapsed by default. But if you expand any one of these, you get the configure link. So yes, the links to configure are all on the extend page, the module page.
So assuming you don't want the bifurcation that existed on that index page, because it had 2 links for block, not one. But assuming you don't need that, then it's really a superfluous page. Getting rid of the tabs makes the most sense. Simplify, you still need the placeholder. And if something comes along in the future where you want to reuse that page more robustly, you can. Like you might want to do a bet, like by task, what's on that page may not be enough, but this here serves practically no purpose, it seems, from what everyone's stating, at least on this call.
Yeah. What I think would be more an interesting issue would be in Drupal 10, get rid of this page, but in the meantime, in Drupal 9.3, whatever, make it possible in the module configure, like the module info.yml file, to define more than just, because the only thing you get in there is what the configure link points to. Make it possible to add maybe more links down here, or by what Benji's got on his screen right now. So in addition to a configure link, we could actually make it possible to add additional links there, perhaps, and then that would, like, in the case of block, you'd have the configure link, but maybe you also have like the block layout link in there. And because I use this page a lot, like if I don't know where a module's configuration is, I'll go here, find the module, click the configure button. Like that's a really useful thing. I've never used the index page. I think I forgot it existed until this issue popped up.
Yeah, and I guess I was wrong there. There is only the configuration here, and this page has links to recent log messages. It doesn't have the configure link. So I'm beginning to hear some consensus developing that this page is actually not useful. If we just remove this tab, then the question of what to call the tabs goes away.
And you can add text on the task page or on the main page that is currently task that says for a listing by index, go to the extend page. Like you can guide people from here to the extend tab, or you can even put a link to the extend page if they want to be able to configure by module. Like there's no reason we can't put more information on this page. It doesn't just have to be a list of links.
Yeah. I mean, if you get to this page in the first place, you deserve a link. Although, to be fair, there is an extend link right on this page.
That's true. But you could add context in the description of extend. You can say, please note, you can configure by module from here. Like,
I also say we just add a big red arrow points to extend.
just click.
And on a more serious note, how would we feel about the idea of, like, we could open a follow-up issue to make it possible to give modules more control over the links that appear on the extend page for their module. So like that idea that you could have the block module could add a blocks link or something, like a link to get to the block library.
I like it. It sounds complex, but I like it. I mean, it would make the extend much more extensible. And I could see for complex, so most module maintainers wouldn't use it, but any really complex module would get a huge amount of use out of that, because that's a page that everyone knows how to find. So
Right.
it basically gives you control over short links to your module.
And I think there's an argument there that potentially, because what you'll tend to see is most modules have a configuration section, and the majority of modules probably provide some additional, their purpose is not configuration, that's aside to their purpose. Their purpose is providing some tangible thing, usually to the user, like whether that's a new kind of block or something. But then there's modules like block, like node, like media, that provide entity types. And to sort of circle back to the the start of this meeting, potentially there's something to say, well, we could provide something, make it easy for an entity type, a module to be like, I want a link to the entity types collection on this page. Like that's something I could see be possible just with the entity annotation, you know, and a link just automatically appears to the collection page which is essentially what that additional block layout or that additional custom block link is. It takes you to the listing, the collection for blocks, or in the case of content, like it would take you to the node, it would take you to the content tab, or again, taxonomy would take you to the taxonomy top level collection, because that's a really consistent pattern that we see across core and contrib. And the collection pattern for entity types is very well established. So I think that's the only additional use case I could think for links on this page, actually, and that could be solved in entity API, really.
So do we close this issue as won't fix, or what sort of feedback do we leave for the tabs?
Die tabs die? Is that no?
That reminds me of an episode of The Simpsons.
I think that's where it came, yeah. Or there's a Big Bang Theory reference. It's like die, toaster, die, or something. I'm way off topic now. Never mind. Yeah, I think we could repurpose the issue personally. I mean, I'd be okay if it was repurposed to be like, let's sensibly deprecate the index page somehow, whether that's then removing the links, but then somehow like maybe add an issue targeted at 10 that's marked as postponed that says actually, because we wouldn't want to remove that root in like 9.3 because then that's technically a backwards compatibility break. We could do that in 10, that's fine. But then, as I said, simultaneously, I can I'm happy to open a follow-up issue or something to look at the idea of what's the best way to allow modules to provide, maybe an issue exists for a bit, what's the best way to provide modules the ability to add additional links to the extent page?
And I guess looking at the issue, I noticed that it went for several years without much attention until Quiet One revived it. As for postponing it, couldn't we just assign it to 10.0? I think that would make more sense than postponing it.
Yeah, we could do that. That's kind of what I meant, I guess, because I think well, nothing could really happen until the 10.0 branch is open for development. So yeah, either way.
And I guess it's, you know, not a usability question, so we don't necessarily have to discuss it here, but we'd have to consider the technical issues of whether any sort of deprecation would have to be done in Drupal 9 in order to prepare for removing the page in Drupal 10.
That could even be just like a warning that shows up on that page. It's like this, I don't know if we've ever done that before. Like if there's precedent for adding a warning to a page that's going to go away, maybe we don't even need to.
And it would be pretty easy to add a redirect so that if anyone has links to that, they go to some appropriate page instead.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's something could be done in 9.3. At least the warning, if we want to put it, if it's considered appropriate to put a warning message on that page, like that could be done in 9.3 or something, certainly, and or maybe even the redirect, and then the root itself is just removed in 10. So yeah, I guess depending on, maybe it's worth getting product manager input on that, because depending on how there's a couple of options there. So we might be able to do that one issue, might need a follow-up, you know.
Okay, so I think short version is that we should think big and not just tweak the text. And Aaron, would you like to leave a comment on this issue?
Yeah, sure, can do.
And I think it's less than 5 minutes till the end of the hour. That's not going to be enough time to talk about another issue. Any further comments before we wrap up? Hearing none, thank you all for coming, and we'll have more issues to look at next week. Hope to see you again then.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, Benji.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.